PCR test. Here's Donnie. Is this Donnie?
Hi, is this George?
Yes. How you doing, Donnie?
Hi, George. How are you? Tony O'Sullivan here from CNN. Is it okay if I record this call?
Sure, I'll do the same.
Okay, let me just put you on speaker. So just confirming, George, that you're comfortable with us recording this call.
Yes, and you are too.
So, George, I wanted to ask you about accusations you're making against Maatje Benassi of being coronavirus patient zero. Could you talk me through the specific evidence you have that she is, as you described, coronavirus patient zero?
Yeah, well, I have to, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and then there's a source here that I cannot reveal. But I can walk you through the open source information, but I don't want to endanger my source, and I don't want to release anything classified. But if you're willing to hear me out on the information, I will go through that with you.
Of course, that's why I'm calling. We want to hear your side of the story. So I know you've presented a lot of your thoughts about the coronavirus, the origin story more generally. But if we could just stick specifically to the Benassis, could you talk me through what proof you have that Maatje Benassi has coronavirus and is coronavirus patient zero?
Well, now, first of all, I said that it also could be a vaccine. So I'm saying she's testing positive for the antibodies, okay? So patient zero could be a group of people. It could be up to 375 athletes. I've always said this from the beginning, that went to those games. Now, the games I'm talking about are the Wuhan World Military Games run by the NATO, okay? So now I'll go into, she collapses in the middle of her race. These are circumstantial things. She's short of breath. She has this oxygen debt. These are symptoms of having the coronavirus during her competition. The U.S. team performs very poorly. They're 40th. And we're typically a world power that wins the Olympics. We typically win the military games. The whole team performs very poorly. But the key source that's public is a Chinese, a spokesman for the Chinese foreign minister. Chinese foreign minister is said that they want to produce the records for the U.S. athletes that came to Wuhan. And they believe that the smoking gun lies with the athletes from the U.S. team, and they want to produce those. And I didn't know that you were going to ask about Benassi specifically, but the Chinese spokesman for the foreign minister is the source. So
specifically on Maatje Benassi, how do you know that she has the coronavirus or has antibodies, or how do you know that for sure?
Well, I have a source at the Fort Belvoir Community Hospital, and she actually works or I have someone saying that she works at the Fort Belvoir Community Hospital, and she tested positive for the coronavirus.
She denies that.
She denies that? Did she deny that she works at the Fort Belvoir Community Hospital?
She denies that she's had the coronavirus, that she has any symptoms of the coronavirus. She and her husband don't have the coronavirus.
Have they, has the Mike Pompeo given that information to the foreign minister of Japan, who's saying that China is saying that the U.S. is stonewalling on the athletes' health records? Have they produced the health records for the Chinese foreign ministry?
So I think that the calling for the health records and the Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson you referenced was actually, I believe, citing some of the work you have presented. I just wanted to ask about Maatje's symptoms as you described them. She fell off her bike and she fractured a rib. She had a concussion. It was towards the end of the race. That's why she was breathless.
Sure. No, that's not what I'm basing my conclusion on. I'm basing it on a source saying that she tested positive or at least positive for the antibodies at the Fort Belvoir Community Hospital. Have you seen her records? Have you seen her test that shows that she doesn't have those antibodies in her body?
The Benassis say that you're ruining their lives by spreading what they say is lies about them.
Okay. Has she told you that she is the courier for the Supreme NATO Allied Commander?
I just want to ask you, I mean, are you comfortable enough in your understanding and in the evidence you say you have that you are publicly putting these people, the Benassis, through all of this? They are both living in fear at the moment. They've received threats. They've seen messages under your YouTube videos that have made them fearful for their lives. How do you feel about that?
Well, about every time I go on the air, I say that violence should never be used. Never. And they're threatening anyone is not right. I'm a journalist. I follow up on leads. I cross-check. I present information. Matt Benassi works inside the chemical bioweapons program at Fort Scott Air Force Base. His mother wrote the WHO blueprint for bioweapons, along with a guy from Fort Detrick. So again, you have to present the whole story. You can't just present a victim side of the story or a perceived victim. I have been a perceived victim of somebody who was on the other end of this phone call. If you remember the story you did 3 years ago on me. So
you also said that the Italian DJ Benny Benassi is in some way involved?
I said he was sequestered in the town of Milan and was one of the first people brought forward by the press in Milan as the first victim. Whether or not he tested positive remains to be seen, but as the first victim. They're hiding.
But George, he hasn't been brought forward as a victim. He's cancelled his tour and his shows, much like pretty much every other performing artist around the world, because people can't gather, people can't travel. We spoke to him. He doesn't have the coronavirus, and he's not related to. He's never met the Benassis that you speak of.
Right. Well, so there is a long line of Benassis that are in control of the NATO armories directors for different NATO countries.
But do you think an Italian DJ has anything to do with NATO?
Have you ever checked out his lead DJ, who's Nastia? Do you know who Nastia is? His top DJ that goes with him to all these concerts? She just happens to be the wife of Leshchenko, the person who came up with the Russia hoax. So again, it's always this one heartbeat away from people who want to get Trump. Now, why does it always have to be people one heartbeat away from people who want to get Trump?
George, you worry that by putting out a lot of this, your findings in the way that you do, that you're putting the Benassis, Maatje and Matt, that you're putting their lives in danger?
No, but I think that your reporting about me put my life in danger. I will definitely say that. So you might want to report that in your reporting. You painted me out to be some kind of conspiracy theorist who was just quoting things wildly. I was going to talk to whistleblowers in Piketon, Ohio, that people were saying the uranium never got here, and we are only cleaning these cylinders. And this is another DTRA. This is another Defense Threat Reduction Agency production. So I was doing that, and somebody drugged me into something that was happening on the coast. So I wasn't. We did an interview with you. We recorded it. None of that information was forwarded. I was definitely made out to be some kind of right-wing conspiracy theorist, and I was in fear of my life. So if you can imagine how I feel, then maybe the Benassis potentially feel that way, but I have a lot more evidence. I'm not a courier for the Supreme Allied Commander. The Supreme Allied Commander used a tool called ShadowNet to throw and weigh in on European elections as well as the United States election in 2016, a bot. Your role at CNN is to go get the Russian bots, right?
Your claims about the Benassis have gathered a lot of attention around the world. They've been picked up by the Chinese Communist Party media outlet in China. Have you heard from anyone in China? Do you receive any support from anyone in China for the work you're doing right now?
No, I don't speak Chinese. I've never spoken to anybody from China during this period of time. I'm trying to think. I had a calculus teacher in college. Dr. Tung was the last Chinese professor that I remember. And it was a tough class because he had it was hard for him to say closer and closer when he was talking about integrals, but that's the last person I remember who was Chinese that I talked to.
And George, you've been running your YouTube channel pretty much on a full-time basis for quite a few years now, as you and I both know. Is that your main source of income at the moment? Do you make a lot from YouTube ads or donations, or how do you support your work?
No, I've been demonetized. I sold 2 houses, Donnie. I did some very ill-advised reporting about drug trafficking by Evergreen Aviation in Oregon. I had all kinds of harassment and I left Oregon, sold both houses, and I'm working off, and I lost money on both sales. And I am using that money to fund, and I have a Patreon account as well. Very low dollar contributions, $2 and $3 contributions from people out in the United States. I have about 913 or 14 contributors at last check. So,
can you tell me, George, when did YouTube demonetize your account, and did they give you a reason for doing that?
No, they demonetized me first when I mentioned coronavirus. And then they said later on that we had there's a creators channel, and the creators channel every once in a while says new tips and tricks that are coming out, and they said that you would be demonetized on that side channel that nobody ever watches. So it was a very left-handed way of informing everyone, but that's fine. I would rather, put the truth out as I know it rather than be beholden to YouTube, and I'd rather reach out to the folks in Patreon. I don't make that much money at all. I didn't make that much money at all anyway, monetizing. So I'm not fishing for clickbait.
Can you give us a ballpark on what does a channel like yours make on YouTube when it was monetized?
Well, I can tell you I've lost money in the 4 years I've done this. I'm about $250,000 in the hole. So if that helps, it's less than the last one I saw was about $500
for a month.
A month,
views?
yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned.
But it's been as low as 300. I mean, it goes up and down.
What's the highest it's been for a month? Do you recall?
I don't know. I can't. It's somewhere in that neighborhood.
Right.
I was demonetized for the one that went to almost 600,000 views. I didn't receive any money for that. It was rebroadcast in China. Most of my videos are copied and translated to Chinese, and I have no idea who's doing that. If they're seen in China, I have no idea.
You're very popular in China at the moment, it seems.
Yeah.
You mentioned that when we last reported on claims you had made, you don't view yourself as a conspiracy theorist. Is that correct?
No, not at all. I consider myself an investigative journalist. I think we all have a point of view. I try not to bring that point of view to the story. But when I see, I had done stories on Fort Belvoir and testing at Fort Belvoir 3 years ago, Donnie, 2 years ago, 1 year ago. I've been out there many times, and it's hard to believe, but it's going to turn out to be true. And I develop sources, and it's going to turn out to be true. I don't.
You've never spoken to Maatje Benassi, I take it.
No, I had a source for their phone number and tried their phone number, but they had been disconnected. I'm right here. I've offered on every live YouTube. I say I'd love to interview them, and if they can, if they want to.
Do you not think though, as you describe yourself as an investigative reporter, that you should really try and really try and reach them and give them the opportunity to respond, like you're being given the opportunity now, before you go and accuse them of spreading this virus that has killed people.
How did I say they spread it? I just said patient zero. I just said testing positive for the antibody. That could be a vaccine. That doesn't mean they're contagious. That saying that they tested positive for the antibody is not saying that they spread it. I said that there's a small South Korean church, or a huge South Korean church of 300,000 people that are responsible for spreading it.
Do you feel at all concerned that without sufficient evidence, you are making claims about these people publicly that has led to them being scared for their lives, for their families' lives?
I've been in a much worse situation by you, and so I feel like I reported the situation responsibly. I think the American people have a right to know how this started. I think the American State Department and President need to produce this information for the Chinese. They're saying we did it. We're saying they did it. Everyone's lost their job, their homes, their businesses that they built up over their whole lives over this. The Benassis are not the only victims. This is not the time to paint one person who is in the middle and mix of all this, who's stonewalling on producing the information. It's not the time to make one person the victim when there's the whole world is being victimized here.
Who do you think is responsible for the virus?
Fort Detrick, and I'm going by people who work there, said they did all this transfection. I'm not saying it didn't occur naturally by walking up the genomic ladder from bats to.
So you think it came from the U.S., not China?
No, there's a collaboration. Dr. Fauci wrote 5 $750,000 checks from the University of North Carolina. It was called the USA Predict program. It was called
George,
1,000 Talents program. Dr. Belvoir has 4 startups with Wuhan. He worked at Fort Detrick. I mean, come on. This is a joint development. It's a joint development between the United States and China. There's the purchase orders. I don't know how else you can see it. You can read the report that came out of this, 37 pages of exactly what they did in the test.
George, I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me. Obviously, you have my email address and other contact details if you want to elaborate more on what were the questions I was asking you specifically to the claims you're making about the Benassis. But thank you very much for your time, and perhaps speak to you sometime again soon.
Yep, the NATO couriers aren't the only victims, Donnie. Thanks.
See you, George.